Well, I'll tell you what, let's respect those who showed up on time and get this started. Thank you for coming to our very first webinar. We appreciate your attendance here. What we're going to talk about today is what I call safety by slogan. In today's world, we see the nuclear verdicts in the news all the time. Too often, those are brought upon the companies by what they do and how they do it. Many times it's by the things that they write, they say, the threat is out there. And because of that, we want to take a look at not only what it is that companies say that gets them in trouble, things they put out there, but we also want to take a look at what you can do about it to try to avoid this threat. You know, as part of a series that I'm doing, Death by Dogma, I'm going around giving live presentations on this. Next one will be, or one of the next ones will be at the ATA Safety Conference in Phoenix. But I'm taking a look at, and you'll be seeing messages about future webinars that examine some of these topics that are specific to this. There's about 8 or 9 different things we talk about in Dogmas that are more in depth because we don't have the time in a live presentation. That you can only take so much of listening to me in these things. But we'll talk about dogmas that needed to be changed. You know, dogmas, things we're entrenched with. One of the things we're going to talk about now is the webinar, the manuals and the websites. Because what has happened is that many companies look at these not so much as material that can change and develop policies, but they look at them instead as places that they can do writings to give the appearance of safety, if not affect safety in itself. You know, safety manual, everybody's got one. But what goes into and what do you have in there? Well, the dogma is that for too many companies, the safety manual is in of itself seen as evidence of safety. You know, we put it in the manual and it must be right, you know. It says so in there, so that must be the way we are. But here's the thing. If you get on that stand and if you are questioned in a courtroom about what is in your manual, about what you post, what you say you do, the platitudes, the safety, can you back it up? Can you do or can you say what is in there on the stand, not just what's in the manual? Because it's the proof that you're going to live and die by in a courtroom on these matters. You know, the manual itself to prove company safety, now you prove safety not through platitudes and slogans. You know, the notion of we must be safe because we say we are. Well, you know, the guy with the Dad's Greatest Dad t-shirt, he says that, or the nerd with the world's greatest lover. If you put in AI and say, give me a shot of a nerd with a world's greatest lover t-shirt, that's what you get. Or what about the person who says, hey, they call me Thor, just because he's got the t-shirt and you find out he gave himself the own nickname. You know, you've met those kind of losers, right? But what we're doing and what we're saying is we've got to look at the dogma safety slogans that we have, and we got to change it. We got to change it from just being slogans to things that are defensible in a culture that you have. Safety is our number one priority. I see that many times, both in websites and in manuals. Signs posted to that degree. You know, the website slogans are the same. Touting safety as being a priority, and it's great. It should be. But just saying it doesn't make it so. In fact, it gets you into more trouble. The ultimate safety slogan that I've come across, safety is our number one priority. Again, it should be. But this was a slogan put into the press release by the company OceanGate. Safety is our number one priority. In a press release, we believe real-time health monitoring. OceanGate, that was the company that sent those big containers down to supposedly see the Titanic. You know, when your safety slogan, safety is the number one priority, and they later write an article about you that says the Titan submersible was an accident waiting to happen, there's a fatal disconnect there in terms of litigation, right? You know, you can't just say it. You got to do it. You got to live it. Slogan your way to safety is not the way to go. In fact, it's liability by slogan. Because what you're doing is you're writing a check that you can't cash. You are setting a standard for yourself that you're not meeting unless you do the background work instead of it to do it. It's slogan versus results. It is safety is not a slogan. It's a culture. And it's a culture that starts at the top. At the top, permeates through all the elements of the corporation and all the elements of the business. If somebody, a driver, operations, a dispatcher, if they ask the question safety or, then you don't have that safety culture, because safety is not an alternative, it's the action. And if that's not what you have, writing those slogans or having those platitudes aren't going to help you at all. They're going to get you in more trouble on that when the suit comes. It is not an absolute. And I say that because of the reality of human nature. It is aspirational. We should all, and everything we do, try to have safety. It is a goal. But the manual itself has got across the notions that have a purpose to achieve that goal, rather than setting that standard that we can't live up to. It's what I call safety manual exposure. There is, you've heard all of the reptile theory, and I can see all of you nodding out there. Yeah. The reptile theory has a relative called the rules of the road. The rules of the road is a theory developed by plaintiff attorneys around the same time. And what had happened is they say, look, we're presenting these cases to a jury, and the jury is looking at it and saying, being told by the judge, they have to determine what's reasonable under the circumstances. And the jurors are looking at what drivers are doing or happening, and they go, gee, I've done that myself, so I'm not going to say they're unreasonable. The plaintiffs are losing. They said, look, we got to develop a different way. If somebody runs a stop sign, well, there's no question, they're at fault. That's because it's a rule of the road. Well, what we have got to do is to establish rules of the road, in effect, rules that the defendants are measured by. And if they violate them, then our argument is they're automatically at fault. So where do we get those rules of the road? Well, they start to create their own principles. They get agreement in the depositions, and you see those in the reptile depositions as to what those principles are. They prove that the defendants violated those principles, and the purpose is to eliminate the complexity and confusion that the jury has. The sources of the rules, well, statutes and regulations, that's obvious. Contracts, jury instructions give it. Common sense, moral imperative, but where they really come from, where they're drawn from, are the policy and procedure manuals of the defendant companies, the training manuals, the personnel manuals, and any other documents that describe how the company is to conduct its activities or says it does. And here's the theory. What they're saying is, if you've put that in your own material, what you have in effect done is to say, we're recognizing that as the standard of care. And if your driver or your company doesn't live up to that, well, then you fail to meet that standard of care, and thus you're negligent, liable under the circumstances on that. The objective is to be able to show, quote, the defendant's own policies and procedures, even some of the more honest defense witnesses, agree with the plaintiff's versions of the rule. They tell you, to the plaintiff attorneys, to even have a stack of these regulations and policy manuals sitting on their desk in front of the jury so they can show how this looks. Well, let's talk about a defensible manual and policies, the ways to address this. I give another talk. It's called The 4 Phases of Litigation. And from the end of litigation going forward, I work backwards in terms of what's most important. The last phase is litigation. That's where we deal with the discovery and take the matter to trial. Before that is the post-accident period, where we've got to get in and find out what the plaintiff is doing. The third period is the accident response. We can rue our fate with all those billboard attorneys, but we have an advantage none of them have, and that's immediacy. No one knows about that accident before us. But the most important phase of litigation is today, right now. You have the opportunity to develop the manual, the safety program, the culture, the plan that you need. I did a webinar for the Nevada Trucking Association. Paul Enos, my good friend out there, says, I quote you a number of times. I go, oh, what a say. And Paul goes, when you say, and I've said this probably at every talk, think about the safety program you would like to present to the jury if you were on the stand today, and then go out and create it today. Because that is evidence, what you do before the accident. What you do after the accident, that's backfill. And that's only going to get you so far with the jury. Spoiler alert, that's not very far. What you need to do is to look at the policies that you have. Prepare them today. These are the policies we want to show in litigation and how we develop compliance. Compliance important? Well, the folks at ATRI, the American American Trucking Research Institute, not to be confused with ATRI, developed a list in their nuclear verdict study that showed when there's violations, non-compliance by the defendants in cases, these are the percentages of verdicts that go against them. Hours of service, driver history logs. These are the policies we need to focus on to comply with the FMCSA regulations. But why have the policies and why do this? Number one, we need to present them in a manual so that they have the drivers or whomever uses a manual knows your expectations, knows what you expect them to do and how they're to do it. What's the point, or how can somebody be judged if they haven't been provided by you the expectations? Or how can they learn if you haven't provided a background and expectation in terms of what they need to do and how you need to do it? The standards, what are you holding them to? Many companies, as you probably should have, a progressive discipline program. How do you measure them and apply the standards to them on that? Most importantly is safety. What are the policies that are going to be the safe? What are our aspirations in order to operate in a safe manner out there? A conflict on this, safety versus litigation. Now, really, I look at it as safety and litigation. The two go hand in hand because the purpose is to avoid the accidents that are going to get you into litigation in the first place. The best defense, not have the accident. I attend a church in California when I'm out there, and our minister, just retired, he wrote a book called The Purpose-Driven Life, one of the largest sellers of any books in American history. Well, we need to be purpose-driven with regard to what we do in safety, the culture, and take that down and use the manual to the point that we can convey that to the folks who work for us, the drivers, those in safety and purposes. We need to promote safety, reduce the risk, and minimize exposure. And we can reconcile all of those and meet those goals. The best safety, no accident. Best defense, no accident. Somebody just said that. The best defense of having that is safety. The best defense is to minimize exposure, and the goals of our policies are to have no accident. Let's develop policies that achieve that purpose, not just punitive. I see too many times when folks have moved into a position and they look at their role as being gotcha folks for the drivers or to be punitive to the drivers. What we need to do is to look at developing a behavior that minimizes violations and improves safety, promotes safety in the easiest and best way. The old way used to be, one method, just do it. How does that work with your teenagers at home? But what we need to do is to convey these policies in the manual in a way that achieves the purposes we're looking to do. We do these policies and convey it. Too often we have lengthy writings in there. I look at a lot of manuals I get from companies in the course of litigation, and there will be page after page of paragraphs and script. Think about it. When you get your manuals at home or get your manual for your car, how many of you read it from page to page? In the course of those depositions, what do I find? Well, the driver will be asked, did you get some type of manual? Yeah. Do you remember what was included in the manual? Well, not really. Do you remember if that included how to safely open the barn doors on the back of the trailer? Well, I don't remember. Do you remember what was included? Do you know whether the manual contained information how to safely do it? I don't remember. In fact, I don't remember anything specific about the manuals. This is an example. It probably covers 90% of the depositions on it. That's the situation we need to do. We haven't achieved our purpose. You haven't promoted safety. If your manual, what is in it, how it's presented, and how it's done, doesn't convey that information to the drivers we have. The result is the worst of all worlds. We have a manual that sets the rules. The driver acknowledges in writing by his signature that he or she received it, but they don't read it and has an accident. They're held to those standards, but we haven't conveyed them and got those across to the drivers. They're violating the rules in the manual. It wasn't read by the driver, and against which the driver and the company will be held liable in a suit. Let's talk about some of the keys for manuals. Number one, a manual needs to be understood. That sounds obvious, We wouldn't write it in a foreign language to give to drivers who don't speak that language, but we need to convey it in a language in which it's going to be understood, perceived, and related to the drivers. It's got to be absorbed. It's got to be in a manner in which the drivers are going to be able to, as the type of learner they are, be able to achieve the goals, which is to comprehend what's in there and be able to apply it, draw on it when the circumstances arise. And it should be minimized. It should not be some overflowing manual just for the sake of puffing it up, thinking that, gee, if I show this on the witness stand, this will really impress people. It won't. Been there, done that. What we need to do is look at the purpose that we have. Conform driver conduct. The question is, when was the last time you've read through your manual? I find many times these are just an accumulation of things over time. Answer to the quiz is 64%. We do that with special software in here. Trust me, I'm a lawyer. So what we do, the next question here is for your manual, is it a complete document or is it an accumulation of inserts, things that you've generated over time? Because here's the deal. When we get a lawsuit in a case, the question is going to be, what was the manual that was provided to the driver or was applicable at the time of the accident? Well, if you have just given inserts over time without some identification on them, what time you issued it, what time period it was applicable to, there's no way to sort that out. If over time you supplement your manual, totally understandable, make sure that you date it. When your manual was issued, what the applicable date is, and what the date of the inserts are, so that we can identify those and present the manual that was truly in place at the time of the accident. The key thing is have time identification on them. Here's a thought. Copyright your manual. Now look, obviously I am not an intellectual property attorney. I can't even spell copyright. But you should consider copywriting it because the plaintiffs put it out there on the internet. We look at some way in order to combat that, just as we would fight somebody dispersing improperly copywritten other material. Retention of your manuals. You keep them beyond the time and the life period of which it is. Are they available in case we have a lawsuit and a need to draw upon those manuals to show? Some of the issues we arise in the manuals are that too often there are directives in there. This is it, do this, that's it. And for some operations and for some procedures, billing procedures, that's fine. You need to do that. But some things such as do not admit fault or the absolutism that I see all the time in depositions. The proverbial plaintiff will come back and says, well, do not admit fault in an accident. Mr. Driver, Ms. Driver, if you had a station wagon load of nuns, you rear-ended them, you wouldn't admit fault on that? As you can tell, if you Google station wagon load of nuns, this is what you get. What we need to do is to balance it out. Don't admit fault or don't place blame. Your job is to get and relate the facts, not to render judgment in this circumstance. Again, avoid absolutes in this. We are aspirational, trying to achieve that goal, safety, without setting a standard, but maintaining consistency. One of the other things with regard to policies, are they realistic? I've seen companies that set policies and set standards saying that, gee, going into it, I know only so many people are going to follow those standards or follow those policies. But here's the deal. The problem is that what we've got to know is that you have set standards, if you can't achieve them, that are only going to result in exposure and litigation. And with regard to those standards, are they going to be adhered to? And if they're not adhered to, are you going to enforce it? Just as important on that, are you going to apply them to all people in the company? Because I have folks call me and say, look, we're looking at a no cell phone policy. Not hands-free, not otherwise. All right? Are you going to apply that to salespeople? Well, that's their livelihood. How about to management? Well, they live out in Alfredo. That's a long way away. One of the largest verdicts was a situation where there was an accident by a salesperson on a cell phone. And the plaintiff's argument in that case, this company has a fleet of trucks. They know operating while using a cell phone is dangerous. How do we know that? We got a copy of their truck manual. They tell their truck drivers not to be on the phone when they operate. Think about the big picture on this. Make sure it's realistic and applicable to all across the board. For accident procedures, make sure that you not only have those in your manual, but also with regard to those, have been provided the information or provided what is needed to the drivers in that. Do you incorporate documents in your manual? Incorporate by reference. Many times I'll look at manuals and somebody will go through, and again, they're looking to fluff up this notion of let's show how safe we are by throwing it all in the manual. They'll include quotes from other entities and institutions that sound like good platitudes with regard to safety. But they take it from newsletters, handouts, or other publications. The FMCSA, hey, those are the regs we live by. That's fine. But when you take it from other safety organizations, this one was pursuant to the guidelines established by the National Highway Traffic Safety Council. The primary responsibility of a driver is to operate safely. I don't disagree with that. But when you say I'm taking this section from there, you have opened the door for someone to say, well, then you agree with everything they say. You agree with all the sections, and then to cross-examine you and hold you to those standards at the time of trial. Stick to what you have in the manual. Make sure if you have a statement of law in the manual, make sure it's correct, that it's thorough. A number of years ago, I had a case in which we had a defensible case. A four-wheeler turned in front of us as we were coming down the highway. Accident occurred. And deposition of the safety director, did you give your driver a drug and alcohol test post-accident? No. Why not? Don't have to. Why didn't you have to? Well, FMCSA regulations, and those of us in the industry know, it's nursed, hearsed, or towed, right? Nursed, treated away from the scene. Towed away from the scene. Hearsed, person was killed. And with regard to towing and treated from the scene, there has to be a ticket involved. Well, you know, the person was treated from the scene. Yes, the vehicle was towed. Yeah, but no ticket was issued. Well, let's take a look at your manual. Guess what? They left the ticket requirement out of the manual. And pursuant to what they said in their manual, they were going to require post-accident drug and alcohol testing if there was towing, if there was treatment from the scene, regardless. If you got it in there, make sure it's right, okay? Keep it minimal. You know, there's a company out in the Midwest. I was at a conference a few years ago. Their manual's on one sheet of paper. It is 6 principles, kind of like those of us who took the Smith system, right? Well, they've got their philosophy boiled down to six principles. And they tell their drivers, if you follow these principles, you have achieved and you followed the best course of safety that we have. That's a little ambitious, but don't put things that are superfluous, unnecessary in there just for the sake of having them. What do you need? Keep it just to that information. Also think in terms of the form of the manual. You know, the primary thing, and as we come into the depositions, what we see is that too often the manuals are given to the drivers and, you know, don't read it, you know, or they don't have the taken the time in order to see everything that's in there. Well, maybe it is not the driver that's at fault. Maybe we need to look at the individual forms of the options we have in terms of presenting this information so that it is absorbed by the driver so we can get those policies and achieve the goals of safety. You know, lengthy prose in there. Hey, true confession. If I see a paragraph, a lengthy paragraph, I'm probably going to read the first sentence and jump to the next paragraph. I'm not going to plow the whole way through it myself. Do you think your driver population are the type that are going to plow through that as well? No dispersions on the drivers, but we've got to consider who it is that we have in our workforce and how we relate to them. You know, because if I see a lengthy page of prose with a lot of words on it, one after the other, filling up all the space, I mean, I'm going to have me go. You know, not to be confused with YOLO or FOMO or Froyo, but MIGO, my eyes will glaze over. I'm going to look over everything that's on there, or most of it, and not absorb it, let alone take the time to read what's in there. Winston Churchill, at the height of World War II, Battle of Britain, his principle was, if it's not in one page, whatever's submitted to me, I'm not reading it. You know, if Winston Churchill could absorb or get the information he needed in one page for saving the empire, I think we can condense it as well. You know, there's a principle out there now, Axios is a news service. They have everything and are putting them in bullet points. You know, I think that is a much better way to get this across, to get the points, a lot of white space on the page so that we can do it. In fact, I do this in the litigation that I do. If I'm writing a brief or writing documents for the court, I start off with my summary, put it right up front. Here are the bullet points, 3 to 5 bullet points. If somebody doesn't read anything else, your eyes glaze over. This is what I'm saying. This is the important stuff. You want to know if it's right? I've got a bunch of legal theory and principles and citations down below. But I want to get it up front so that when you do read the rest of it, you know what it's looking for. Kind of like a Scorsese movie. But what we want to do on this is let's look at alternatives for our manuals. What is it we can do to make these manuals or make our information more absorbable, more, understood by the drivers that we have? Think in terms of the principles that we have. Perhaps checklist. The book, The Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande, a doctor up in Boston. He was looking for ways to reduce mortality in third world hospitals. So he went out, he was looking at increasing sanitation conditions, disinfecting, surgical techniques. The number one way that he reduced mortality in third world countries, he developed an operation checklist so that nothing was missed in going through that procedure. They made sure that they covered everything. Well, that works in third world countries, right? Not so fast, my friend. Because he came back to Boston, some of the greatest hospitals in the world, and applied that to those great institutions that we revere in terms of being the best hospitals. And guess what? They benefited. Their mortality rate was reduced by the use of checklists that were developed for operations. It's not just one size fits all. What about videos? In today's YouTube society, and let's take it down to the next generation, TikTok society, many people learn or find out how to do things based upon the videos that are out there on this. But Khan Academy is a whole school based upon 5 to 7 minute videos breaking down subjects such as geometry, algebra. I mean, where was that when I was in school? But I became an attorney to avoid math. But, why can't we use this with our drivers in order to convey the information and develop their retention? Or even use visual means to do it. Now, too often people think, well, how would that look? Hey, we use visual means, for example, when training. Good folks, it's Impact, who are our friends over there, in terms of their training manuals, will visualize it so it's more observed by the drivers. Those of us with a CDL know the importance of brake checking or brake testing before we go out there. And how about, this is the time of the year that we get our CVSA manual, and how do they convey it so that we have an instance in terms of what the out of service criteria are? Well, not only the decals, but here are the criteria and what to look for on this. We get this and we use this information on a visual basis. Why don't we do that with the drivers? And the ultimate graphic and almost a comic book diagram type of thing. And you're probably thinking, well, that's like really, make us look childish or such. But I'm reading the Penn State Alumni magazine a couple years ago, and I see in there that they are using graphic novel techniques in order to teach humanity courses at Hershey Medical School. Now, this isn't for surgery, but what they're doing is looking at conveying the information, and they're finding the information is better absorbed in a visual mean for their learners than it is just a straight prose method. Now, there's a number of methods we talked about there, and each person may differ in the way that absorb it. But if we want to establish the policies, we want to convey the policies, we want to get them complied with, let's look at meeting the needs and interest of our workforce as it is and what it is. The primary problem with the graphic problem is a status quo bias, the refusal or the reluctance to change on this. What we want to do is develop policies that work and policies that are absorbed. Develop compliance as we go through this. One of the things I do and talk about is to develop these not just on do A, don't do B, but let's provide these policies in a way that is psychologically based on behavioral psychology, based on behavioral economics. Danny Kahneman, great economist I quote all the time, just passed away in the last week or so. But there are ways that are out there to lead folks to do things without being totally commanding, totally forceful to them. Give them the option, but kind of channel them in that option. The way that supermarkets put the candy right when you go out the checkout line there, we can do those with a number of things. but also do them in a way that gets this compliance. Now, that's a whole nother webinar. You'll have to come back another day for that. Sorry, not included in the price of this one. Just remember how much you paid. But what we want to do is to talk in here in terms of what are the psychological principles that you can use. And I've given that talk to the American Trucking Association and presented on a future seminar. But such things so that by the use of the videos that you have, particularly the in-cab, you can get those drivers, help the drivers to perceive a circumstance immediately when it happens and to take the safest possible course. That's what we're here for safety and for being able to strive for that. Hey, look, questions, information, podcast, we're going to post this video, post it as a podcast. Feel free to reach out to me. Any questions, any documents? We have accident response forms that will give you a model accident response plan. Just send us an email. We'll send them to you for free. When have you ever heard that from an attorney? Hey, thank you so much for joining us. I'll let you get back to lunch right now. Any questions or thoughts? We greatly appreciate it, in particular your comments on this webinar.